Can you guys see the PowerPoint now?
Yeah, see.
Yes.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. This is the next public engagement meeting as a part of the tree ordinance rewrite project being handled by the Department of Community Development for the city. We released last week the draft of the rewrite for the public to begin reviewing. And so we'll run through a few quick slides, but then we'll really just open it up for the community to provide any initial input that you might have about the draft. We'll run through a few slides, again, just reviewing the purpose of the project. We'll talk about the community survey results a little bit, and then also some of the highlights of the draft rewrite. So again, for the project, we were really looking to strike a balance with tree canopy management and new development as it occurs in the city, while also making sure that we're continuing to implement the programming that the city desires. So some of the highlights from the community survey, one of the questions that we asked was what was unique about Brookhaven from a tree canopy perspective. And some of the comments that we got back related to established tree canopies, wildlife, shade, beauty, and serenity, being in a metropolitan area. One of the other questions that we asked was where should the city be focusing its tree preservation efforts? And we got comments back that it should be a mixture of infill residential within our commercial corridors and within publicly owned lands. And then this last question here, again, just talks about some of the programming that the city already participates or provides, and then asks for input from the public on what additional things we could be doing. And so obviously an enhanced ordinance, which is the project that we're working on now, increasing fines for tree ordinance violations was another recommendation. Coordination with the Trust for Public Lands, neighborhood tree planting or tree maintenance competitions, and then encouraging urban agriculture throughout the city. So again, the draft rewrite was posted last Wednesday on the project website, and some of the major highlights are that it really is a total rewrite, and we hope that it ends up being more user-friendly for the general public and the development community. We have updated and new definitions, revised regulations related to minimum tree densities and tree protection during construction, And the draft ordinance also removes the alternative compliance allowances that were under the existing code. So with regard to next steps, again, today, April 22nd, we're having the final public engagement meeting, but that obviously won't be the last points where the public can participate in the process. We will take this to Planning Commission work session and City Council work session in May, and then back to both bodies in June with an intent for council to adopt it on June 22nd. So at this time, I'll ask the team if they wanted to add anything to the discussion about what has been included in the rewrite. And then we'll open up the floor for any comments or questions from the public.
I'll start off. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining in today. So my thinking for maybe the best approach for this meeting, very similar to the existing ordinance. The new ordinance draft is a 12-page document. Now some of that's just 3 pages are basically just definitions. So in terms of substantial content that's been changed or modified, I wouldn't say all 12 pages would be included in that, but we can go through line by line. I think it would take a while to do that. However, if that ends up being the way this goes, that's totally okay. But for the most part, I think our approach is going to be, we're going to let input and questions kind of drive what we reference with the draft that's posted on the webpage.
Okay, and so I have a first question in the Q&A section. It says the current tree ordinance calls for property owners of single-family residences allow for 3 trees to be removed in 12 months. The draft doesn't seem to have any limit at all. Why is that?
Yeah, so appreciate the question. So what I'll do, I'll try to direct everybody on this meeting to a code section, if and where there's a relevant code section in the new draft, which for this question there is. And you'll have to bear with us a little bit because we're also getting used to new code section numbers and all that stuff. So if you go to page 9, section C, tree removal permits. So to most directly answer that question, there is a discrete maximum for tree removals permitted by homeowners on single-family residential lots as well as other zone lots, and it's 2 live trees per 18 months. Whereas the current code allows for 3 every calendar year.
And Jeff, can you say it again?
Yeah, so page 9, if you look at it's section 1454 in the procedures and requirements section. And if you go down to C on page 9, tree removal permits. So this is the protocol for tree removal permits. And the new guidelines are that what will be reviewed and permitted for tree removal permits that are unaffiliated with developmental activity are 2 live tree removals per 18 months, whereas the current code allows for 3 live tree removals every calendar year. So this is an idea that India kind of brought to the table. I'll credit her for seeing what was going on, where there were multiple situations that we observed in our short time serving as the arborist in Brookhaven, where there was a permit application that would come in November or December for 3 trees, and then January or February of the next calendar year, we'd see a permit application for more tree removals on the same property. So switching from per calendar year to every 18 months is basically a way to eliminate that tactic.
Okay, the next question is, what happens when the developer clears the land and the next person comes in and wants to remove more trees? The end result is we get a fairly clear-cut development.
So it's a good question. That the current code in a way covers that. So I think there might be some situations where it's less about the code or the ordinance, and it's more about site inspections and enforcement. So the current code actually requires that the minimum density, which right now is 120 inches per acre, be maintained for 5 years after the issuance of a CO for single family residential, and in perpetuity for commercial and any other type of zone lot. So it's there, and the best way we're able to cover that in terms of the Arborist division is by way of review. So one thing that we do as part of our review is we check the dates on the issuance of a CO. And if that property is still under 5 years, then that minimum density of 120 inches has to be maintained. The current code allows for an arbitrary drop down to 60 inches after 5 years for single family residential, which really makes no sense if the intent is to maintain a certain minimum tree density throughout the city of Brookhaven. So that's one thing we eliminated with the new ordinance, as well as 120 inches always. There's no sudden drop after 5 years. So that's something that's more applicable to homeowners than any type of development activity, is that arbitrary drop of 120 inches for 5 years down to 60 after that 5.
It's 130 inches.
The
In
new
the new
draft,
ordinance.
yeah. So India points out the new draft, the new minimum density number is 130 inches per acre instead of 120.
Okay, the next question is, what happens when the developer clears the land and gets fined, pays the fine but doesn't replace the trees, and then sells it to the next person who gets to remove more trees?
So I think there's more to that question. If a developer removes trees, which for infill development is going to happen pretty much every time, if what they remove has been approved on a site plan from the Arborist division, which is me and India, then there are no punitive measures taken. They've done what has been approved by way of tree removal and tree preservation. So if really the question is clear cutting, which has been a land development practice in Brookhaven, is it going to be allowed to continue by way of the new ordinance and by way of the approach and the management of the Arborist division? No. And so I hope I kind of answered that question there a little bit, and I can get back to more details on that. But also, if there is a removal that is executed on a site that was not part of the approved site plan, then yes, there is a punitive measure and it's a citation. And that's something that just recently has finally, I feel like, has been addressed appropriately.
Yeah.
If, liberties are taken, if it's an honest mistake, whatever it is, the review was done and approved and stamped based on what was shown to be removed, based on what was shown to be preserved and or replaced. And the ordinance drives all of that. Indy and I do all our reviews according to the ordinance. So if there are deviations from that with tree stuff, which, of the various things that could be, the one that's more or less irreparable that you can't correct is unpermitted tree removal.
And one of the things that I want to address is the fact that we are very thorough in our review process. I look at when the property was last changed hands. I look to see look at all the permits that were associated with the address. I look at when the house was built and if there are any modifications. And that's one of the reasons it takes a bit of time to do our reviews. We look through a lot of records and compare photos and the plans that were approved and the ones that are in our system already. Before we just arbitrarily, we don't just approve plans. We actually research every property thoroughly before we approve tree removal for construction or for single family homes.
Okay, and the next question we have is, how did we arrive at 130 inches instead of 120? The increase seems very small given the documented velocity of canopy loss.
That's a great question. I mean, I won't say it's arbitrary, but at the end of the day, it's a great question because it does. I can see from the outside, if you're not doing plan review all day, every day, it seems like you're just kind of grabbing a number and going with it. So it's a really good question. And the reasoning behind this number is that I don't think 120 is terrible. You have lot sizes in Brookhaven, and other jurisdictions in Atlanta where infill development is kind of predominating the market. The lot sizes aren't changing. The buildable limits are ballooning outwards in all directions. So there's a certain maximum number there where it's just not realistic, unless you got back into changing other parts of the land development code to reduce buildable limits and all that stuff. So that number comes from doing many, many, many reviews where we saw where, the tree preservation was decent, but it would have been still realistic in terms of what was being allowed in terms of, other aspects of land development on that property, where just one or two more small, medium-sized, younger trees could be protected completely with zero impact to the root zone, and of course grow into good, mature, large shade trees, in the future of that property. So it made sense to go up a little bit, but to go up much more, I think it would help to maybe see some examples of what site plans for infill development in Brookhaven actually look like, and how hard it is to squeeze in trees on these lots without an excessive amount of critical root zone impact, which will start to be counterproductive. You know, the tree will still look okay for a site final inspection. CO will get issued, go back 1 or 2 growing seasons later and assess the condition of that tree, and you'll see the impact. And you know, there's that balance between what's realistic in terms of tree density for a lot before you just start to have too many critical root zone impact issues. And you know, then you have this ripple effect of problems where the CO's issued, so you know the tree density is checked off, and the homeowner who moves into that house is on the hook for dealing with declining trees 1, 2, 3 growing seasons later. And City of Brookhaven loses too, because those are trees that for which density credit was awarded, and 2, 3 growing seasons later, they have to be removed because they're hazard trees.
And I think one of the other things that needs to be addressed with that is that this, to be able to sustain 120 inches or 130 inches per acre of land, I know it seems like just 10 inches, but if you think about that additional 10 inches of preservation is 4 or 5 trees, 2-inch trees that would be saved or planted on a property. And it allows those new trees to have a better opportunity to grow around where the house has been built. I think over time with the increase from 120 to 130 plus, not taking down the requirement for preservation of single family homes, I think our canopy will over the next 5 years, you'll start to see the numbers really increase.
Yeah, India makes a good point. If you look, I'm all for replacement plantings too. However, if you compare for the, you know, what's involved with the planting of 4 2.5 caliper replacement trees, 2.5-inch caliper replacement trees versus the preservation of 1 10-inch, let's just go with white oak. You know, you've got when a 2.5-inch caliper tree is spaded out of the ground, up to 90% of its root system is lost. Okay, and then if you factor in just the production, you know, what's involved with the production of 2.5-inch caliper tree times 4 versus just nature creating a 10-inch white oak that's already on that site with an undisturbed root system. So therefore you know, that entire critical root zone, which is also a calculation determined by the ordinance, you know, the soil. So it quickly goes from, you know, the loss of root system, the fact that, you know, you don't start to really recapture all that with a replacement tree for 3 to 5 years later, which is fine. But at the end of the day, if it's 4 replacement trees versus just, you know, preserving 1 10-inch white oak on a lot and its entire critical root zone and everything that comes along with that, it makes sense. You know, preservation is always the number 1 choice for what we do, and replacement's number 2. Because when you preserve a tree, well, there's, you know, there's no production involved with that. You preserve the soil also. So all of those things are also kind of recaptured with preservation versus replacement.
Will the fines collected go back into end replacement only?
So, yeah, it's a good question. So when we actually have to issue a citation for an unpermitted tree removal, that's a court summons, and the fines paid as part of those court cases do not go to the tree fund. That's through the court system, and that's kind of as much as I can answer that question. The tree fund is basically the pool of money that's collected from specimen tree removal recompense. that's covered by way of monetary payment. Now, Indy and I, again, back to the way we review permits that involve specimen tree removal, we always require the maximum amount of inches to be replaced on site, whatever is appropriate. So if we deem it appropriate to plant 4 more trees back on site that are in addition to minimum tree density, then that's what we'll require. And then what's remaining, if any, has to be paid, as a monetary fee into the specimen tree the tree fund, the specimen tree recompense. But just to be clear, our goal, we don't want to be collecting money for specimen tree removal. So our goal is preservation. And if that's just, not a possibility for certain trees on a lot, then we go to trying to recapture as many inches as possible by way of replacement. But like I said, a lot of times you just run out of plantable space, and the rest has to be collected by way of monetary payment into the tree fund.
Okay, and the next question is, what if a tree dies on the lot within 5 years?
Yep, and it happens a lot. It's a great question. That's so, and we can revisit here in a minute some of the new tree protection requirements, but that's where it gets sticky, because the CO is issued based on one item on that checklist for the issuance of a CO is meeting the minimum tree density requirement. And oftentimes a tree that's been impacted to where it will fail over time, it's not showing any signs of that impact by the time a builder goes to have their site final and get their CO. So it happens a lot. Whether it's a planted tree that was planted incorrectly, which you see a ton of, or a tree that wasn't sufficiently protected during construction, or should have never been counted as a preserved tree in the first place due to its species or condition or whatever, which is another thing Indy and I have been working to improve with the new building permit, especially. You see that a lot. So we do require replacements, though, because technically even the current code requires that 120 inches per acre be maintained for that first 5 years, even for single family residential. So if the removal of that dead tree or those dead trees, however many there are, the density deficit based on that number, then we do require replacements to at least stay at minimum density. And that will continue with whatever new ordinance is adopted, that will continue.
Okay, regarding resident tree removal, changing from 3 trees over 18 months to 2 trees per year. Over the space of 3 years, we are still at 6 trees removed. Am I getting these numbers correct? So can you just run back through what that is again?
I think that they have it backwards. I think currently it's 3 trees every calendar year. And the new ordinance will be 2 trees every 18 months. So yes, property owners will be able to still remove trees. These are non-specimen sized trees, though, and they still have to meet their minimum density. So we require that if it's a specimen sized tree, they have to provide an arborist assessment showing that it's dead, diseased, or hazardous, and or that way they can remove the tree. But the numbers are not the same. I mean, that pushes us out to 6 trees in
3 years.
Yeah. It makes it harder for them to remove that many trees, 6 trees. It's not just in 3 years.
Let me just add real quick. From our perspective, the average homeowner is not typically is not removing trees indiscriminately. Does it happen? Yes. Some homeowners just want sunshine. They don't want tree. But I would say, I feel confident saying there's typically a reason. There's typically an issue going on with a tree or some trees on someone's property because tree removal is not cheap. So this is a change that I think will certainly help tree preservation efforts in Brookhaven. However, I'll be honest, the emphasis with the rewrite was not so much pertaining to, homeowner tree removals. Because typically a homeowner is only willing to spend $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a removal in their yard if there's something going on, if there's a reason for it. What we've seen is, the tree removal cases, the unpermitted tree removal cases that we've handled that have been egregious, they've all clearly been step one of a bigger picture, which was near future and impending land development.
Okay, the city has a tree fund. How is it spent? And I think you just mentioned that the city has a nursery. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, good question. So all the tree fund money, and maybe I should just reference, just to make sure I'm using accurate language, and then I'll just elaborate on it. So we actually have tree fund defined in the new ordinance, a monetary account paid by maintained by the finance department of the city, to which monetary recompense for the removal of specimen trees is paid. So we elaborate on the management of that fund in its own code section, which is, give me 1 minute. Okay, here we go. Section 1453, which I believe is right after the specimen tree section. So page 8. So numbers 1 through 3 kind of describe in general terms how that money is spent. The purchase and installation of trees in parks, right of way, and other city owned or leased property. Number 2, maintenance of city trees, which I'll say right now, the last quarter, the majority of the money that I've spent from the tree fund has been on specialty tree care in Brookhaven parks. And there's at least 1 or 2 right-of-way tree care work orders that I don't think have been executed yet, but that are pending. And then the promotion of a healthy urban forest. So that could be anything from, educational sessions or partnering with Trees Atlanta or private contractors, which Brian Borden with Parks and Recreation has already done a great job of working with some forestry companies to handle invasive species removal in our parks, especially out of Ashford Forest Preserve and Blackburn Park, Murphy Candler. So just anything, that's kind of that, anything that could in any way promote a healthier urban forest in Brookhaven would qualify. So sorry, I just realized I didn't fully answer that question. The current status of Osborne Park is we are close to having a well drilled at Osborne, obviously, to have a tree nursery, need irrigation. We decided to add to the scope of operations out there bioconversion, fancy word for composting. So I think that'll be that'll be really cool too. So we're getting close to having a well drilled, hopefully at Osborne or wherever a hydrology report says to drill nearby, run irrigation, clean the pad out, grade it out, and have it ready to go, and get electric down there. And then I think we'll really be equipped to go ahead and start to formalize the use of Osborne Park as a tree nursery, including rescue trees from sites, good movable trees, and the building envelope. That's kind of the criteria for trees that potentially could be looked at for rescue, as well as just buying in stock and starting our own.
City projects and operations should comply with the tree ordinance. And the question is, will that be enforced with the new draft?
I think we're gonna try. I think that, so let me start answering that question by directing everyone to back to section 1454, procedures and requirements. Section B, land disturbance permits, what we call LDPs. So that applies to, substantial land development projects along right-of-ways, city right-of-ways, commercial developments, anything like that. So something that we've already implemented actually with a handful of upcoming commercial developments is if you go to the second or the last bullet point in number 2. So it's basically a project arborist requirement. So for any LDP, commercial, public space, whatever, if a certain percentage of the minimum tree density, 35 or more, is going to be covered in terms of replacement, which is pretty much all of them, or at least 20 replacement trees will be required as part of that project, which again is pretty much all of them. That will trigger the requirement for an arborist, or what we call a qualified professional, and that's a term we decided to switch over to for the rewrite, because registered foresters are obviously also qualified professionals when it comes to handling tree stuff. And we get reports for our reviews from registered foresters also. So just to kind of expand beyond just certified arborists. Either way, any permit that where that requirement is triggered will require an arborist or a registered forester supervise the management of trees for that project. So the preservation, tree protection, but then obviously to ensure the quality and guide the entire tree replacement process, all the way from selection to looking at things like where root barriers might be required, root bridging might be required, checking soil volume versus selection. All those things will come into play. And one thing that the impetus for this idea was really, you've got a site where 20 trees go in, 50 trees, 300 trees. Those trees, need to be selected well. You need to make sure they're going into at least halfway decent soil, and you need to make sure that they're planted correctly. Blackburn Park right now, as an example, and I think this was inherited by all current staff at Brookhaven. There are 90 plus trees in Brookhaven Park that I've tried to collect the history on when these trees are planted. Most of them are planted as part of a huge, I don't know if I don't want to name, I guess, parties, but either way, it was a volunteer effort, and they were planted big plant material, most of which were B&B trees, but the burlap in the basket wasn't peeled back at all. So, and usually the B&B trees, there's some kind of tie at the top of the wire basket and burlap, and in this case, it was all like inch or inch and a half, webbing to strap down the top, and none of it was cut, none of it was peeled back at all. So we have 90 plus trees that are finally reaching the size where the root crown and root flares getting girdled by the wire basket and the straps that were never removed. And a few of them are probably already beyond repair, and we're having to contract corrective work on the other 90 or so trees because they would all end up having problems, and most of them would probably fail within the next 5 years if something wasn't done. So just having a professional on site to make sure that the trees are being planted correctly is huge for these bigger projects. And that will, I think the approach should definitely be that that's a requirement for right-of-way plantings as well.
Can we make sure that the new code allows the clear posting of trees to be removed to allow for public questions and commentary and enough time to impact on the approval or denial of the permit?
So let's go back to page 9, tree removal permit section C. The idea is this, and we'll see how it shakes out with the final draft, but there will be a posting associated with tree removals. I have 2 boxes of signs just for that sitting in my office right now. They're 2 by 2.5. They're bright green. They clearly are official City of Brookhaven signs. So the idea is to that those signs have to be posted in the yard day or days of work for tree removals, and the permit number has to be big and legible and visible basically from across the street. This idea was actually kind of developed in coordination with our code enforcement, because they were also coming across a lot of cases where it wasn't clear if a permit existed or not, and if there was one, what was the actual approved scope of work. So all that will be visually communicated on these signs. As for a posting that like a preemptive posting, here's how I would answer that. We review tree removal permit applications. India does specifically right now. She handles all tree removal permit applications, and she reviews them. She doesn't just open them up and click a button and they're good to go. She reviews them. So they're scrutinized. They're scrutinized by professionals, India and I, and to try to add in another layer of public input for somebody wanting to take down, a tree or some trees in their yard where it's already reviewed by, professional staff. I would honestly say that seems like an unnecessary layer to me.
And generally, that's how the department and the city have opted to proceed. We want to make sure that we have a strong ordinance in place. And that's why we're looking for the input that we're looking for right now, to be able to make sure that we're covering the concerns that we have about tree removal. Once that strong ordinance is in place, then again, like Jeff said, the additional layer of public comment on really what is an administrative process would be unnecessary. So I think that's the goal of the entire project, to make sure we have in place a strong code that staff can implement. Let's see, the next question was, can we make the 130 inches higher and on larger lots such as R100, R85.
Can I finish the thought on the last question before we move on?
Sure, yep, I'm sorry.
No, it just kind of came to me. So, you know, I want to acknowledge also with, you know, most of the tree companies, most of the tree companies operate in Atlanta, they do everything above the table. They know that they make sure they are familiar with the permitting protocols for whatever jurisdiction they're doing work in, and these guys will not remove a tree unless there's a permit issued from that jurisdiction saying they can remove that tree. So they are willing partners in something like an extra, layer of, having a big green visible sign posted in the yard day of work with the permit number, details for the actual approved scope of work, which we already do, by the way. We line item what trees and where they are in the yard have been approved to be removed. It's an annoyance to them because operationally it's just one more thing. However, they're fully aware that every time a fly by night, unlicensed, whatever, willing to do any level of work unpermitted, comes into Brookhaven or anywhere where there's overlap with their operating area, that's business that was stolen from a tree company that is attempting to do everything the right way in terms of they're only willing to do permitted work from that jurisdiction. So even though it's an extra requirement that they have to now adhere to, they're willing partners because at the end of the day, it's a business for them, and the fly-by-night operations are stealing business from them and they're cheating doing it. So I'm sorry, could we repeat the last question?
It was, could we have higher than the 130 inches for larger residential lots like our 100?
I think that the main thing is this: the larger the lots, the more trees are going to have to be saved per acre. So it's 130 inches per acre. So the larger the lot, the more trees are going to have to be saved regardless. So I don't think that we have to push the number up. It self adjusts based on
It's a
the lot
rate.
size.
Yeah, it's a rate.
Yeah.
Can we have something in the code that requires developers to maintain tree life over X amount of time?
I think it depends on the scale. So commercial sites, I think that would, okay. So that gets tricky. So here's what I'll say. The language in the LDP tree replacement requirement that requires a qualified professional oversee the tree preservation and tree installation or tree replacement on that site. The language is such that there is a site inspection the following growing season. Okay, so the health of those trees has to at least endure into the next growing season. It has to be verified by the designated arborist or forester for that project, whether it's India or I for future city projects or a private arborist or forester for a private commercial development. And it's, at that point, we're already requiring action after the issuance of a CO. So would it be good to go back, 2 growing seasons later and do another health check on all the trees and require corrective measures or replacements as needed? Yes, but I think the further away you get from the date of issuance of a CO, the harder it is to kind of pull that off. So I think, the following, you'll catch a lot of mistakes, during the actual project phase where there will be multiple inspections. Year two, you'll see signs of trees that just are already in decline, and you'll be able to pull off replacements and or corrective measures as needed. And at a certain point, I think that the tree care responsibilities shift over to current management or property owner. And that is covered in the new draft, just in the general applicability section at the beginning. So I think it's before the definitions. Yeah. So just on page 1. Section 1448, number 1, each property owner or agent acting on behalf of the property owner shall be responsible for the normal care of trees located on its premise. So let's say there's a commercial site where, for whatever reason, it's clear from anybody, not just a professional, that half the trees on that lot are in terrible health. Well, they can, per this code section, they can be notified by the city to take action to address the condition of the trees on their property.
Okay, we had a question about the recompense being at $200 per DBH inch. The comment was the city of Atlanta charges $240, and the question was, can we move up for consistency?
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid question. Another good point that is kind of built into that question is that we did make it a point to try to better align Brookhaven's ordinance with what is in, what are in some of the other jurisdictions, tree ordinances, including City of Atlanta, City of Alpharetta for sure was a huge resource, and some other ones. So yeah, I think the more you align with other jurisdictions, the easier it is, obviously, for compliance, for developers, for tree companies, particularly, who are always having to switch over to the finer details of this code versus this one. And that's always going to be the case a little bit. But how we addressed it, though, we kept it at 200, but there's no cap. There's no maximum anymore. So the current code caps off specimen recompense owed at 60 inches per acre. And we just took the cap away. So I did have an example written out. I probably won't be able to find it right now, but here, I'll crunch some numbers. So let's just say.
And again, our thing is we're not trying to just get the money. We want to actually educate either the tree companies, the homeowners, the builders, on how to better look at we want to educate the builders on how to choose better quality trees on the property. We don't want the money. We want the trees in the ground. So the fees that we do get, again, we just took the cap off. I think that's going to be a lot more effective for any of the builders. And I don't think homeowners are going to fall into that category at all. Are you still trying to find that, Jeff, or not?
Yeah, I mean, so the rest of that code section kind of is the same in terms of how it's all calculated. And I think that'll just inherently result in better preservation decisions.
Yeah. I mean, just recently with the specimen tree recompense, where if we didn't have the cap, it would have been $11,000. Now, with the cap at 60 inches per acre, we only receiving $5,500 into our tree bank. Again, we didn't want the tree to be gone, but I mean, I think the deterrent, having no cap on the amount, is not that we should take it up. We just want them to save the specimen trees.
Yeah.
Let's see. So in the future, the city cannot cut down healthy trees because they want to make a straight sidewalk and the tree is in the way.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's something that has been and still being addressed and figured out with planning and zoning and with public works. And we've already made definite strides. So what we try to do if there's a conflict with curb replacement and or the sidewalk requirement is we take the stance that if it's a city right-of-way tree and it's in reasonably good condition, preservation efforts need to be made. So whether that's a meander, if you have the space, or a root bridge, that's our approach and has been for a couple of months now. That's been our approach. So a good example right now is basically 2 lots that are being developed at the same time, single family residential, where there are 4 right-of-way water oaks, all of which are 2 of which are very large. I can't remember their exact DBH, but they're in like the mid 30s. I think one's pushing 40 inches, and they're in pretty darn good shape. So the developer has agreed to float the entire sidewalk over the root zones of all 4 trees and float the 2 driveways that will be in between some of these trees over the root zone. Now, what I feel is fair to do and am doing on this site is those are the city's trees. So if they need some extra care as part of that development, then I feel like it's fair for the city to take responsibility for that extra level of care. So I've decided to spend some tree money on some pre-construction pruning and root treatments, and it'll get a follow-up treatment after construction for all 4. And of course, you also have cases where, you know, if you drive around Brookhaven, it doesn't take long to find a few examples of the bigger right-of-way trees where, you know, part of the buttress roots, you know, the root plate is completely integrated with the granite curbing. So in those situations, to replace the curbing would destroy the tree. So the curbing stays put, no replacement is required.
Okay, that was everything from the Q&A in the chat and Zoom. I did have one question on Facebook. It says, will the cost of clear cutting go up? And I think that ties into a couple of the previous responses. It says, for example, the property on Gale Drive only paid $10,000 for removing all trees, which is only an added cost for the developers to a bit more per house.
Yeah, those 4 lots, that's a great example of why the cap needs to go away. Because that was essentially a clear-cut stand of woods with some great trees, you know, plenty of great trees within that stand. And the cap, if you distribute that capped amount, $10,000 over 4 lots for a development like that, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a good point.
But that also, the cap being off for specimen tree recompense, but also the number are going up to 130, ensures that there'll be more trees that are going to have to be saved on a property. Right now, instead of it being you get to the number and stopping, you know, we're trying to save trees. They'll only save the number of trees that's required for preservation, but we're making them provide the documentation showing that the trees are worth saving, first of all, and then second of all, that hopefully they won't be just saving the minimum number of trees for preservation. And that's one of the reasons the number went up as well.
So a little more insight too is that just with the Arborist division with Brookhaven, a little more insight there is, you know, the sole answer to improving the way the canopy's managed is not just rewriting the ordinance. It's a key component, but it's not the only thing. And just, you know, distributing the review load from one person to two is huge. And, you know, for the first time in the history of Brookhaven, you know, that's been implemented. So there's at least a little more time to do more thorough reviews to catch some of that stuff. And what I will say, you know, just using that development as an example, those are already in the pipeline before, you know, there was a change of management basically with the tree division. So you can catch a lot of that with review too. It's not just a matter of taking a specimen cap away and then all of a sudden you're going to just save all. You can catch a lot. You can recapture a lot of those trees, a lot of preservation, not just specimen stuff, just good, young, medium-sized trees. I mean, a 6-inch beech tree, if you understand anything about, you know, ecology in the Piedmont region, you know, it takes a lot. It took a lot of processes in nature for a 6-inch beech tree to be there on a piece of property. You know, and right now that's the cutoff for what's even coming in on a tree survey. So that's another huge change, is dropping down to 2 inches for a lot of species and 4 for everything else.
We did get another question in the chat. The special considerations section, starting on page 6, why is this not applicable to city-owned properties?
All right, let me see. Okay.
And it was asking specifically part 3 under that section.
Part 3 under special considerations.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Could you ask that person like specifically what they're referencing?
Yep, it's Karsten Bodell, so I'll turn it on so she can talk.
Hey, Karsten.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, and hey, everybody. Thank you. So for this one, it specifically says this tree stand restoration is only on private land. And there's a lot of tree stands out there that are public, like perhaps Ashford Forest, perhaps Lenox Park Boulevard in North Druid Hills, that probably could benefit from this.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, yeah, and that's just something we'll have to clear up with the language being used. So the idea there is to distinguish it from the previous option. Okay, so one of the main goals with the rewrite was we got to find a way to include at least 1 or 2 more tree preservation incentives into the new ordinance, because as it stands right now, there's 1. It's only triggered when specimen trees come out. So it's even the one that's there is slightly like counterproductive. So this is where that landed is, so the incentive with option 2 is that the current code does not allow any tree within a pervious buffer, state or city, to be counted towards minimum density. This is an incentive to where if you've got a stand of trees in a pervious buffer where there is a documented significant presence of invasive vegetation, which, let's face it, there pretty much always is, if a restoration plan that is developed by a qualified professional, a registered forester, certified arborist, is presented, and that includes everything from, you know, control of the invasives as well as replanting for restoration, covering your bases in terms of preserving, you know, the soil and all that, then the builder or the developer gets to count all trees within that buffer area, which right now is not permitted under the current code. There are a lot of sites with buffer areas where this would be huge. This would be a major incentive for builders and developers. And the whole point of incentives is in land development ordinances is that it's a win-win scenario. If you know anything about the effect of invasive species in ecosystems, they, you know, let's just take English ivy. English ivy can cripple individual trees. English ivy also literally cripples ecosystems. So if there can be a restoration plan that's submitted for sites that qualify, I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense to award density credit for desirable and native trees within that stand, so long as the restoration plan is executed. So part 3 is just to distinguish, that's the incentive for if you have a lot with pervious buffers. Section 3 is basically the exact same incentive, only it's for tree stands that are in non-buffer areas on a piece of private property that you know, basically could be assessed the exact same way in terms of, you know, there's good canopy in there. There's even some good understory, mid-story stuff, but you've got invasives that need to be dealt with and you know, some follow-up with some restoration planting. So the difference there is the incentive, since it's on non-buffer area, any tree in there currently already can count for density if it's 6 inches plus. The incentive there is, let's say you've got a stand with, there's no way to kind of describe this without getting a little technical. If let's just say red buckeye or some baby beech trees or sassafras, you clear out all the invasives, you know, adequate control is verified to the city. You can claim red buckeye down to whatever it is. I think right now it's half an inch. So that's the incentive there, is you get to claim all these inches of native vegetation that you, you know, by the conventional model don't get to claim on your density calculations. Does that make sense?
I think so. So since the question is, why does this not apply to city?
It does.
Well, don't we want to have the incentive for both, you know, apply to the city because it's preservation?
Well, it would apply for, it would apply to city development projects.
Right.
But in terms of like park spaces, those aren't development sites. These special considerations apply to development activity.
Okay, so then I would just say, let's make that clear. And then I know I'm looking at an old version or something, but it rather than say on private property, it'd be in development environment or whatever.
Well, okay, yeah. Non-buffer would probably be the better nomenclature to
Okay.
clear that up.
All right, thank you. That's helpful to understand the incentive because that didn't jump out in the readings yesterday.
Yeah, this is, I'll be honest with you, this is, you know, part of the code that I'm probably most kind of enthusiastic about. I hope it kind of implements itself well. I think it'll be something that initially, I was hoping to get some input from some builders here. They might kind of scratch their heads at it, but I think once they have a lot where they see the value of this special consideration incentive, I think it'll make sense and they'll be all about it. Because, you know, there are a lot of single family residential infill lots where you've got buffer area.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, and we had one more comment in the Q&A. It says, I hope the new ordinance covers most of everyone's wish list. Is there anything in your opinion that we've left out? I hope this ordinance will stand for a long time so the department can do the day-to-day work and not be bogged down with the administrative stuff. We hope the same thing too. But staff, is there anything you feel like we're missing or still need to address?
I think that Jeff's coverage of everything has been spot on. I mean, we're coming together from totally different backgrounds with this, but I think, that we're taking the city's Canopy health into consideration, not just the building. I'm really thankful that Jeff's been able to add a lot of the things that he's bringing in and bringing our Arborist document as well, which I don't think we've really covered that, but I don't think that we're missing much, if anything. I think once there are some small tweaks that we really needed to do, but like I said, the biggest thing is just enforcement, having the ability to enforce the ordinance and again, interpretation. And since Jeff and I are on the same page with interpretation, the enforcement is a lot easier. But this rewrite is, I think, spot on.
Great. Has there been an economic impact study done to see what the financial impact will be to citizens in Brookhaven?
For the canopy growing, is that where? I don't think there's been a study done. Let me answer that first. I don't think we have to have an economic impact study done to show the benefits just of having the canopy grow. But I do understand we have these, this new division that's financially taken away from some of the Brookhaven taxpayers' monies, but I don't see where, I don't understand the economic impact study being needed.
I think it's like for me, it's kind of a scale thing. I mean, depending on your resources and your budget, you could do one for an entire 11 square miles. I think it's easier to, kind of do that valuation, tree valuation study, just kind of lot by lot. And, that exists. The tree value calculators, where, you put all those attributes in and you get kind of an estimate for yearly savings based on all the, positive attributes of trees everywhere from just property values and aesthetics all the way to energy savings, stormwater mitigation, stormwater quality, all that stuff. So it's a good idea. There are ordinances that actually attach those valuations. It's part of the code and it's applied on the tree calculations for development. So it's there. At the end of the day, I think you can cover it that way. How we've chosen to cover it, already are and will continue, is the tree survey, whereas before it basically could just come from any state registered land surveyor. The tree survey now has to come from a qualified professional, from a certified arborist or a registered forester. And all trees on site have to be reported. There has to be a level 2 health assessment reported for all trees. With the new code, it'll be 2 or 4 inches on site. And that's where the decision making for trees on that site starts.
Okay, so that looks like we got all of the questions in Zoom and on Facebook. So we just want to thank everyone for attending this afternoon. We'll have the same meeting at 6 o'clock today. So if you have any questions in between now and then, you can email trees@brookhavenga.gov. Jeff and India, I'm going to send you guys an email. It looks like in the back and forth last week with getting the draft up on the website, I missed something, and the 18 months requirement is not included in the one that's on the project website.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'll send it back to you guys. Make sure you go back through it one more time really good so we can get it to communications to get back up on the project website corrected. But if everyone, any additional comments or questions that you may have, if you can send those in to trees@brookhavenga.gov, and we'll be sure to respond to any of those questions before we get to the Planning Commission meeting in a couple of weeks.
Therese, did you see there's two more
Oh,
questions
sorry.
and one
Nope.
comment popped in here?
The first question is, what is the recourse if council doesn't follow the ordinance? I'm not sure exactly what that means. Ultimately, the city council has made the determination that we will follow our own ordinance in situations where council is unable or for whatever reason, the city isn't able to do so on a particular project. That ultimately is a policy decision for the city council that they have to make and have the authority to do so. So I don't know that there is recourse for us, the city, proceeding with a plan that doesn't exactly meet the ordinance. The next question is, if builders are having to consult third-party design professionals, then will those professionals' data be overturned?
Yeah, these level 2 arborist or forester assessments that are the tree survey for building permits are submitted. They're part of what's reviewed. So yes.
Okay, and that was all of the questions that we have. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. And if you have any follow-up questions, please send them to trees@brookhavenga.gov, and the team will be happy to answer them for you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.